If you have your Bibles with you, you can turn to Colossians chapter 3. Although I'll admit to you, this is a little more of a topical sermon than an exegetical one. We will look at some scripture here at the beginning to give us a big idea, but then I have a lot of sort of sub-points to cover. We're starting a new series. I had thought long and hard about this and asked for a lot of people's opinions where to go next. We finished a series on priorities. I had a lot of feedback on that series, and all of it was really positive. That people seemed to get a lot out of it, felt convicted, encouraged, and all those good things about basically priorities in life and how to keep God a priority. Based on that, I realized when you leave off a series like the one we just finished and then go right into a book of the Bible, you give people too much opportunity to file it away for later. And so instead, we're going to go even deeper. We're going to take the idea of priorities, things we talked about with our energy and our time, our money, our desires and purpose in life and meaning, and all the things we care about and the way we prioritize our lives. We're going to take that a step further and, as you see on the slide, go back to basics. If God is your priority, how do you keep him the priority? How do you reinvest in that relationship? Or, as I'm going to say a lot, how do you reorient your compass, your heart? And I say that because, frankly, our hearts are a compass. They guide us through life. We think of Christianity, maybe you're guilty of this too, I certainly have done this. You think of your Christian faith as a mental process, things that you believe, doctrines you accept, and then on top of that, practices you participate in. You go to church or you read the Bible. And all those things are important, but rooted underneath all of that, the roots of that tree of Christian faith, dig down into something that's more qualitative than quantitative, something that's not so empirical, something that's not so easy to check off, and that is your heart, your desires, your love. Ancient philosophers posited that we are thinking beings, and that's been a popular theory throughout human existence, that we are what we think, that what we think makes us, and the way we think forms us. But I think the Christian message contradicts that teaching. It says we're not so much what we think, we are what we love. You are not just what you think. You are what you love, what you desire, what you care about. And you love what your heart points you toward. So if your heart is the compass pointing true north toward love, and true north is God, then you need your heart to be calibrated so that God is the focus of all of your love and affection. But what if your thinking doesn't line up with your loving? And that's the disconnect many of us experience every day. That what I think and what I believe doesn't really match what I love. So that I might say that I love God, but in my day-to-day life, it doesn't appear that way. There are a lot of other things I seem to love more than God. But I think I love God. I think God is my hope and my Savior, and that Jesus Christ is my path to abundant eternal life. And I believe these things, that he died for me, that he loves me, that I love him. But what I actually love says something else. This is the crux of Matthew 25, a painful passage in the Gospels. One of the only moments where Jesus is so brutally candid with his followers. And he says, some of you on that day of judgment will be separated out from the others. And I'll look at you and you'll have this list of things you thought you did, that you thought, but you didn't love me. You'll say, we prophesied and cast out demons and did many mighty works in your name. But Jesus will look at them and say, leave me. I never knew you. How many of you are familiar with that text? You've heard it before. It's painful. It's one of those troubling things that Jesus said. He said a lot of sweet things, but he sometimes said troubling things, and that's one of them. When he says, depart from me, leave me, I didn't know you. What does he mean? Well, the Septuagint Greek is rooted in the ancient Hebrew yada, and the word yada is the word for a husband knowing his wife and bearing children. It's an intimate knowledge. There is a love, a deep desire for the other. So when we say we want to know Jesus and we want Jesus to know us, we don't mean mental knowledge about Jesus so much as we mean our desire is for him and his desire is for us. And not just in the marriage erotic way, but in a deeper and even more intimate way than that. This sort of selfless concern and love for the other. Jesus has demonstrated that for us, but now he invites us to learn how to love him back. And it is that love that defines our Christian spirituality. And so the series, Back to Basics, I have a subtitle, which was the original title, but it's a mouthful, so I made something quick and easy, Back to Basics. But this was my title, Spirituality that is Meaningful, Not Just the Means to an End. Now think about that phrase, meaningful, not just the means to an end. I think a lot of us practice our Christian faith as a means to an end, and that's why we do it the way we do it, which is very detached from our loves and our desires. It's a lot of heady stuff. We believe this, we do that, we check these boxes because we know we want a ticket to heaven one day. When our time's over, and we don't often think about when that time will be over, but whenever it is, we want to make sure we checked enough boxes, we're on the right path. And so our Christian faith, all the things we do as believers, becomes a means to an end. And in so doing, we separate out the pieces of our Christian faith so that the basics, which are interwoven, become take and choose buffet style things in Christianity. So that if you really like music or you really like preaching, you can take some of that. But if you don't care about prayer and personal devotion and quiet time, you don't need that. As long as you do enough things to feel like you're going to go to heaven one day, or even just to know that your personal guilt has been lifted. So maybe you just go to church every week because praying and taking the Lord's Supper gives you a release of some of your guilt on your conscience. Even that is a means to an end. But this isn't how we treat any other relationship in life, only with God. And that's the problem. If you spend time with your spouse as a means to an end, do you think that's a healthy marriage? If you have dinner with your spouse hoping that someday later something good will come of it, but right then in that moment it doesn't really mean anything, does that sound like a good relationship? I mean, just the thought of that to me sounds idiotic. You don't spend time with people you love as a means to an end. It is an end in and of itself. It is meaningful. I love my children. I pour myself into my children and spend time with them, not because one day I hope they become really great people. I do believe in that future hope. But I spend time with them now because I love them right now. It is an end in and of itself. If my kids died tomorrow and never become the people I dream that they will be, I won't have a single regret for the moments I spent with them in love and having fun and laughing and crying and hugging. And the beauty of relationships is ever present. It's not some future goal. And Jesus tried to explain this to us. He said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. What was he saying? It was really not very intuitive for his audience. They were looking for the way. They were trying to discover the truth. They wanted to receive life. And Jesus says, but I am all of those things. To be in relationship with me is to have access to all that you want. It is to be satisfied, to find rest, to be whole. And that's what we mean by back to basics. By basics, we mean a genuine relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ. Now, I think that includes, not precludes, a relationship within the church. So before we go any further, just know this isn't me saying as long as you have a personal relationship with Jesus, you're good to go. I'm going to argue quite the opposite, that in order to have a personal relationship with Jesus, you have to do all these other things. And I shouldn't say you have to, but you ought to. They are all relationship building in the same way that you can be married and never have dinner together. But if you want a healthy marriage, you're probably going to have to sit down now and then and eat together and talk and maybe even watch a show together and laugh and tell each other stories about work. There are things that you will just naturally do to have a healthy relationship. You can have the relationship without those things, but it will never be mature. It will never be healthy. And that's my fear, is that a lot of people are Christians on paper, but they don't really know how to grow as disciples. They don't have any spiritual maturity. And I see this evidence when people ask me basic questions as a pastor. What should I do in this situation? And the answer is often something like, show forgiveness and grace. And I think, how do they not know that? How can you see the situation? And then there's not a person I'm thinking of in particular, but this happens pretty frequently. And you wonder, how mature is this person? They've been a Christian for 20 years and they still don't understand in that moment all you really needed to do is forgive and move on. How do they not know that yet? And I think the problem is they haven't been doing the basics. They just go through the motions and assume that they think the right things. But we're not what we think. We are what we love. And if you love Christ, you will be molded into his image. That's what this series is all about. And so thinking of Christ and being molded into his image, and bringing all these pieces together, I want to share first a quote with you, and then a picture of some of the things we're going to talk about. So William Harmless, the letters SJ means Society of Jesus. You know them as Jesuits. They're an order of Catholic priests and monks. But they studied under Ignatius of Loyola, who's a great saint in the Catholic Church and one who taught a lot about the love and grace of God, a man that we ought to respect even if we're not Catholics. The Church Fathers, this is what he writes, the Church Fathers rarely discuss spirituality, that is, your faith experience, right? They rarely discuss that separate from biblical interpretation, doctrinal debate, liturgical mystagogy, which is a fancy way of saying the mysteries of all of our worship. We're talking about when we pray, when we take the Lord's Supper, when we receive baptism, those things that are sort of mysterious to us. We know we're supposed to do them. We know they're important, but the way that they work and what God actually does is still a mystery to us. By the way, that's good. They were meant to be mysterious so that you have to keep depending on God. But we know that they're important. Even when we sing songs, there's an element of mystery. How does singing songs bring us close to God? But all of that liturgical mystagogy, the mysteries of our worship, and the preaching of the word, the way that it cuts. It's not like reading any other book, but for the Spirit-led, it divides soul and spirit and cuts between bone and marrow. So it separates the marrow from the bone, I think. So it's this mystery. But what William Harmless is saying is that all of that goes together. For them, Christian theology, for the early church, it was all of a piece, one piece. It was all part of one big thing. And we have done a disservice in the church of separating out, meeting out the different pieces as if you can have one without the other. And I guess you can, but you can't be healthy if you only have one without the other. You can't be a student of the Bible and have no devotional life or prayer life and call yourself a healthy Christian. Just like you can't work and provide and pay the bills in your household but never have any moments alone with your spouse and call yourself happily married. You just can't. You can pretend as long as you want to, but there's not a healthy relationship there unless you spend time together for the sake of being together. And so Jesus invites us back to basics. Spend time with me. Come to know me better. I am the way, the truth, and the life. And so what ways could we consider? The next slide, I have some little images to help us think. And these are things we'll cover in the next few weeks. Fellowship, worship, the word, that is the proclamation of the word, Bible teaching and preaching. Table, the Eucharist, the Lord's Supper, whatever you call it. Study and prayer. And there are others. That list is not exhaustive. I ran out of room for those little icons. But there are plenty of other things we could do that are basic steps in forming Christian spiritual lives. But these are all things that we take for granted, aren't they? And that's the problem. We don't talk about this stuff. And because of that, some of us don't ever really care about doing some of this stuff. If we happen to do it at church, we'll do it because we're here. But if we don't find a space to do it. So if we don't lead you in a quiet time of prayer and reflection on a Sunday morning, some of you will go all week and never have a quiet time of prayer or reflection. That's troubling. That's almost scary. And there are many of these things that if you don't experience them regularly, you are by default hurting the relationship you could have with Jesus. There is no neutrality in relationships. You are either building or tearing down. And I think you know this. Anyone who's been married or has children knows there's no neutral ground where you're just kind of there. You're either growing closer or you're growing colder, growing apart. And so Jesus says, keep doing the things that you know work. Do the basics. Stick to the basics. With that in mind, I want to look at two scriptures, Colossians 3, and then a quick verse in Romans that connects to it. Both of these written by the Apostle Paul, and both of them with the same sort of language of putting something on, language of dressing ourselves, not ascending to something, not digging down into something, but rather just allowing God to clothe us in love and in Christ. And this is what Colossians 3, verses 14 to 17 reads. Bearing with one another, verse 14, and above all these, all these good deeds that we could do, put on love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. And let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, to which indeed you were called in one body, and be thankful. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly, teaching and admonishing one another in all wisdom, singing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs with thankfulness in your hearts to God. And whatever you do, in word or deed, do everything in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. So Paul writes to the church in Colossae, he says, you've got all these things you could be doing that are good things, and you ought to do them. But above all of this, you need to put on love. You have to wear Christ-likeness. You have to put on the love of Jesus, and it binds everything else up. You can't separate it out. You've got to have this loving relationship with God and with others at a basic level in order to be a true disciple, in order to fulfill the calling of God in your life, in order to spiritually mature. And that's the root of all of this, is that in talking about our priorities, many of us came to the conclusion we're not spiritually mature, and we need to progress. We need to push on. And these are going to be ways, today and the next several weeks, these will be ways that we can progress, that we can grow together. And these are things I'll be doing right alongside you. It's not like I'm going to preach how to pray better because I'm an expert on it, but because I'm practicing it in my own life. In a week or two, we'll be developing a rule of prayer, which is basically I'm going to recommend 10 minutes a day that you pick out what you're going to read out of Scripture, who you're going to pray for, how you're going to pray, and you stick to it and pray every day for that 10 minutes. You could do a half hour, but that's not realistic. But we'll get to that. So these are going to be practical things and some theological truths wrapped up together because it is all inseparable. What you believe, what you love, what you desire, it's all part and parcel of one thing, and that is your Christian experience. You can't break it apart. So Paul says here, put on love, put on Christ. And Romans 13:14 uses that synonym for love with the name of Jesus. Same phrasing, but put on the Lord Jesus Christ. In Colossians, he says put on love. Here he says put on the Lord Jesus Christ. And I think for Paul, they are one and the same. Jesus is the love of God on display. You put on Christ, you become like Christ, you will put on the love of God. And they mean the same thing. And make no provision for the flesh to gratify its desires. So there's a sense of self-denial. You have to turn away some of your instincts and turn toward Jesus. And that piggybacks on priorities that we just finished talking about last Sunday. If your priorities are changing and you're deciding these things are not as important as I once thought they were, where do I turn now? Where does my time and energy go? Because if not, you're just going to revert back to those same patterns. But where could you divert that energy in that time? Where could that money go? Where could that desire and instinct and all of that turn toward? In a sense, how do you reorient your compass? So we've determined in the last several weeks, our compasses are off kilter. They're imbalanced. They're a few degrees off one way or another from true north. We have the wrong priorities. This series, I hope, is going to help us determine how to reorient our compass, how to point back toward the heart of God, and thus deepen our relationship with Jesus, and thus become spiritually mature disciples. And I hope that that is your goal, to be a spiritually mature disciple. So, if our heart is a compass, and our heart certainly gives us our bearings for life, then the things that the early church fathers wrote about become all the more influential. And that's why I've read more and more of early church history, because I see so much in the early church a concern for the desires that one has, and not just doctrinal beliefs, but rooted behind those is where the heart is yearning, what direction the heart is going. And I think that is so pivotal to our Christian experience. St. Augustine, and I have this quote on the screen, in his Confessions, if you never read them, you should read them. The Confessions of St. Augustine are basically his memoir of his journey to become a Christian, who he later was the Bishop of Hippo. It was while he was the Bishop of Hippo, a leader of the early church, that he wrote this memoir that exposed a lot of his past in a really embarrassing way. But he was so brutally honest that we still read it today, and it is still helpful, because he equated himself to the prodigal son and showed how in his life he took the father's inheritance, went out and squandered it in every way he could, and ended up in the pigsty, wishing he could just go back home and find what he had been looking for all along. That's Augustine's story. But before he tells you that story, in the preface or the introduction, this is what he says: "You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you." You've made us for yourself, O Lord. Our hearts are restless until they rest in you. But notice what he doesn't say. Our minds are empty until they are full of your knowledge, or our lives are meaningless until we have your wisdom. For Augustine, the core, the root matter is the heart. The same as what Paul shared in Colossians 3 and Romans 13:14. It is the heart. It's what we love that matters. And if you think Augustine came up with this, or St. Paul, you would be mistaken. This comes directly from the Lord Jesus Christ, who, in the Gospel of John, in the very first statement out of Jesus' mouth, asks a question. So the Gospel of John, if you have a red letter Bible, the first red letters in that Bible in the Gospel of John are a question, and it's not the question you might expect. Jesus, in introducing himself to the first possible disciples, says, "What do you want?" What do you want? What a profound question. The first thing out of the mouth of Jesus in the Gospel of John, what do you want? And I wonder if that's exactly what he's asking you this morning, and what he's asking me this morning. What do you want? Not what do you know, not what do you believe about Messiah, not how have you obeyed the laws of Torah, of the Old Testament. What do you want? Because behind all of that, behind the knowledge and the beliefs and the obedience, there is something deeper that has to do with desire, that has to do with love. And so we are not what we think, we are what we love. And Jesus posits, if you love me, then you will obey me. That if the love of God dwells in you, you will love one another, even as I have loved you. There is at the core love, deeper than anything else. What do you want? Some of you may know that the iPhone has a compass app. You've probably never used it. I've certainly never had a reason to use this. Excuse me, but it's there if you need it. The problem is even modern digital compasses need to be recalibrated. And if you've ever had to do it, you click a button and then it rolls a little, like a ball bearing on your screen, rolls around and recalibrates with the GPS and some sort of little gyroscopic motor or something. I don't really know what's going on, but something in your phone has to recalibrate to point to true north. And I don't know how accurate it is either way, but if modern iPhone compasses are still in need of recalibration, imagine in the early 1900s how metal steering compasses could so easily become miscalibrated or misoriented. And with that in mind, I want to read a story to you. And I have it typed out so I don't make any mistakes here because I'm not all that familiar with the details. In 1914, not long after the sinking of the Titanic, Congress convened a hearing to discern what happened in another nautical tragedy. In January of that year, that is January of 1914, right after the Titanic sunk, in thick fog off the Virginia coast, the steamship Monroe was rammed by the merchant vessel Nantucket and eventually sank. 41 sailors lost their lives in the frigid waters of the Atlantic. While it was Osmond Berry, captain of the Nantucket, who was arraigned on charges, in the course of the trial, Captain Edward Johnson was grilled on the stand for 5 hours. During cross-examination, it was learned, as the New York Times reported, that Captain Johnson, quote, navigated the Monroe with a steering compass that deviated as much as 2 degrees from the standard magnetic compass. 2 degrees out of 360, 2 degrees. He said that instrument was sufficiently true to run the ship, and that it was the custom of masters in the coastwise trade to use such compasses. His steering compass had never been adjusted in the 1 year he was master of the Monroe, end quote. So the faulty compass that seemed adequate for navigation eventually proved otherwise. The realization partly explains the heart-rendering picture later captured in the Times. Quote, the two captains met, clasped hands, and sobbed on each other's shoulders, end quote. The sobs of these two burly men are a moving reminder of the tragic consequences of misorientation or disorientation. The human heart, like Captain Johnson's steering compass, has the propensity to drift. Even the slightest 2-degree drift can produce catastrophic consequences. Our hearts need recalibration. In the time that you have been a disciple of Jesus, a follower of Christ, how focused have you been on keeping your heart calibrated? What steps have you taken? What basics have you continued to follow to make sure you're pointed true north to the heart of God? We need that right trajectory. We need a sufficient compass. And we need God's help to do it. So the things we do to orient our hearts, we often would call rituals. And rituals has a funny connotation in our culture. We almost, especially in the Bible Belt, have an aversion to rituals. We're primitive Christians here. We got rid of the rituals and the liturgy, and we just sort of do things the way we think they need to be done. But we all know we have rituals, right? Whether you pretend not to or not, we have rituals. Everyone in this room has rituals. The things you do day in and day out are rituals. And the thing about rituals, the thing about habits, is that they're not just things we do, they do something to you. And you know that that's true, that the things you do regularly do something to you. They change the kind of person you are for better or worse. That's why we use words like virtue and vice, because good moral habits we call virtues. They develop in us instincts to do the right thing, but there are also vices, bad moral habits that over time develop bad instincts, and we do the wrong things by nature. And even the ancient Jewish rabbis talked about yetzer hara, this instinct, inclination toward evil, that there is this desire to do the wrong thing, and we have to set ourselves in good daily habits to avoid that, to do what is right. Well, the New Testament church still believed that. In Christ, they understood that they could do the right things and so prevent themselves from drifting toward the wrong things. That if they focused on God and held to the basics, they could grow in maturity and become great disciples. And so many of them did. And so today there are still some who do, but many of us haven't. We are immature Christians. And this sermon and these sermons are invitations for us, and for me too, to grow into maturity as believers in Jesus, as disciples, students of Christ, because we are what we love. So what are your rituals, and what do they say about your heart, the things that you love? What do you do every day or every week or every month that signify your desires? If I were to follow you around for a few days taking notes, what would I determine you love? Or who would I determine that you love? For some of us, sadly, it would be ourselves that we love to a fault. It's okay to have a sense of pride that's healthy, but some of us go a little beyond healthy. It could be that I learn you love your family, which is certainly a blessing from God. It could be that you love your job, or you love leisure and freedom. You love television or social media. You love people's approval. I don't know what you love. Success, money. You know. And if you think long enough, you'll figure out what it is you love. The question is it God? Day to day, is he the one you love most? Is the Almighty the one that your compass points to most often? And if not, can you recalibrate? Are there basic things you can do to continue to point true north toward Jesus? I think this is where imitation becomes helpful. I would argue two things, imitation and immersion. Imitation meaning teachers that we follow. This is something we struggle with in the Protestant church. We don't really honor saints. We don't have saint days. Now, some do, the high churches, but a church like this one or a lot of the churches in our county don't really do anything to celebrate saints of old. Some of you have never heard of many of the great saints of the church because we have an aversion to imitation. We think imitation is bad, but imitation is not bad. In fact, if you find the right source to imitate, it can be extremely helpful. And so Paul says, follow me as I follow Christ. Do you think that's bad advice, or do you think Paul was on to something? That if you find the right mentor, being a student of that mentor can really help you grow. And so we're called to imitate those that we admire spiritually. In your life, do you have people that mentor you or people that you imitate, even if they're long dead, but their writings or their videos or something still exist, and you tune into those and you read those, and they help you form deeper relationships with God and others and become greater disciples? Do you have that? So I could tell you there are a few mentors in my life, a couple that are alive and quite a few that are long dead. But I look to them as mentors that I hope to sort of imitate, not to be them. I want to be me, but I want to be the best me I can be for the Lord. And that means I might have to imitate those who have figured out what that looks like in their lives, taking my cues from the spiritual success of other people. That's a good thing. It could be for you a grandmother or a grandfather that you look up to. It could be a neighbor who's especially devout and spiritually mature. It could be someone who's been dead for hundreds of years, but their writings speak to you, and you feel this desire to imitate some of what they seem to understand about Jesus. Imitation can be good and healthy. But then the second part of that is immersion. It's not enough to just find somebody or a few people, and you really shouldn't pick just one person to imitate. But, finding a few spiritual mentors that you want to follow and do what they recommend. And in other denominations, they would call these spiritual mentors or spiritual fathers or spiritual mothers. We don't have any of that language in our church, so it's hard to explain, but somebody you can look up to who can help you and encourage you. Once you have that, then you also have to immerse yourself, not just imitate them, but immerse yourself into right practices, doing the things you're supposed to do. Show me the picture of Mr. Miyagi, please. This is serious stuff. I'm a Karate Kid generationer, so many of you know about this movie. You know wax on, wax off, right? Sweep the floor. I love this part of the movie because there's something profound about it. This teenage kid is just doing chores every day and getting very frustrated. And then all of a sudden, he's a master of karate because he did what he was supposed to do day in and day out that seemed almost unrelated. But in the moment of need, those instincts snapped in place and he was whop, 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 whop. I don't do karate, but obviously. If you want to do jujitsu, we have some great people here for that. Quick plug. I haven't done that either. I don't even walk anymore. I just sit on couches. I've really let myself go. Wax on, wax off. Sweep the floor. This is the karate equivalent to spiritual discipline. If you daily do the rhythms in your life that you know you are supposed to do, if every morning you make sure you spend time in the quiet, that every day you pray, every day you read from Scripture, every day you look for opportunities to serve people and do good and show forgiveness and kindness, if every week you make sure to gather with other Christians at least once and fellowship and worship and take the Lord's Supper and sing praises to God and just do the basic things you know work, that have worked for thousands of years. If you just do those things, then in the moments you need it, it snaps into place and it just works. Those daily rhythms become instincts. They become good habits. They become virtues. The problem is we don't do the daily rhythm stuff, and then when it comes time that we need that help, we don't know what to do, and we get beat up because we didn't wax on, wax off, and sweep the floor. You see what I'm saying? If you don't do those things every day, then when the person comes to fight, you're not prepared. You don't know how to defend yourself. I think this is actually a pretty good analogy. I don't usually use movies, but I thought that was a good one. You can move on from that slide. It was also so disappointing. Steve, whatever his name is, Mr. Miyagi, is totally American and doesn't have an accent at all. So that's, when you grew up, what is it? You know his full name? Oh, it's Pat, not Steve. Okay, Pat. Pat Morita? Thank you. Is the other guy Ralph Macchio? Is that right? The kid, is it Ralph Macchio? That's his name? I'm not a movie buff. I've seen that movie a bunch of times, but I don't go onto IMDb and look up the cast names, Rob. Pat Morita. In all seriousness, it's heartbreaking when you learn somebody isn't who you thought they were. But what if that's exactly what you're understanding now about yourself as a Christian? That you're not who you thought you were. That what you thought isn't really what you love. And those things don't line up. Well, then the only option is to go back to basics. To re-enlist yourself in the daily rhythms of Christian spirituality. And it's something that feels foreign to some of us. The thought of quiet time and prayer and devotion feels weird. Some of you, it's a daily part of your lives, but for some of us, we don't participate in anything like that. And the thought of 10 minutes of prayer is already daunting. What am I going to pray about for 10 minutes? That's a long time when you're sitting in the quiet. This is going to be tough. But in the weeks ahead, we're going to hopefully learn together how to start doing these things as a church, and so as a congregation grow deeper and become better disciples for the Lord. There are ways to inform disciples and ways to form disciples. We have a lot of information. I just did a survey for one of my classes yesterday where we went through our churches and answered a bunch of questions to determine whether we err on the side of spiritual institution and information heavy or justice and service heavy, basically. You know, are you doing a lot for people or are you studying a lot about God? And there are some other elements in there too, but it was so obvious when I answered these questions on the survey. Our congregation is very information heavy. We spend a lot of time studying the Bible and church history and what that means in doctrine and hopefully putting it into application. But that's only one piece of the Christian experience. You need that piece, but there has to be devotion. There has to be prayer. There has to be real worship, not just going through the motions. There needs to be acts of service. There need to be opportunities for justice and mercy and affecting change in your community for the gospel. And all of that has to be happening. How do we make sure it's all happening? And I think the answer is quit trying to make it all happen and go back to the basics. When you go back to the basics, then things do start to fall into place. That's one of the great mysteries I've discovered in my Christian faith, that when I do the basics, everything else starts to work. But when I ignore the basics trying to make everything work, it never works. And so I'm trying to share that with you. Disciplines, worship, prayer, they form. Lectures and sermons and Bible study inform. We need both. We need to be informed disciples, and we need to be formed into disciples. And so our church is going to try to balance that. It's much like dating and marriage. When you're dating someone, especially in the beginning, you don't know that much about the person. Even my first year of marriage with Kylie, we struggled to communicate well. I had a lot of fights and arguments because you're now living with somebody that you've never lived with before. Even though we had dated for quite a while, it's different when you share a home and bills and day-to-day life and eat the same meals all the time and do laundry and dishes a certain way. And just so many elements of moving in with a person. And that early stage, after the honeymoon bliss period, can be really frustrating. And for some couples, it never works out and they end up divorcing. Others take a turn for the better and figure out how to communicate. Thank God that happened for us, but it doesn't for everybody. Why? It's because of basics. It's the basics. It wasn't like there was some secret to a healthy marriage that Kylie and I had to read the right book or go to the right counselor and then our marriage was fixed. It was just spending time understanding each other more, learning how we communicate, learning our personality types, what we love and what we care about and what bugs us and what annoys us. Learning those things over time about that person created a healthier relationship so that our marriage now is much stronger than it ever has been. And I hope it continues to get stronger. That's the goal with the bridegroom Christ and his church, his bride, is for the dating to become healthy marriage so that a couple who have been in a healthy marriage for 30 years can communicate sometimes without speaking. And a couple who have dated for 3 months can barely speak without fighting. That's the difference. It's the years of relationship building by just doing the basics, eating together, talking to one another, sharing about your day, making each other laugh, learning what annoys one another and trying to quit doing those things out of respect and out of selflessness, doing acts of kindness to build trust. And it's all those daily basics that make a healthy marriage, that make a healthy relationship. Same with parents and children, same with friendships. It's the day-to-day living. And those things are not they're not means to an end. They are ends in and of themselves. Having the dinner, having the conversation, spending the time together is fulfillment. It is meaning. And I don't need it as a step on the process. It is in and of itself meaningful. And so what Jesus invites you into is not discipleship so that one day you'll be a disciple, like one day you could get married, but because you are already married, enjoy your marriage to Christ. That's the invitation. Every day, make the most of it. Spend time together. Get to know him so that you will be mature in that relationship, so that you will know how to communicate well. There are some who come to me for advice or prayer, and I wonder if they had just spent a few minutes every day reading scripture or praying, they would have never had to ask me for this advice. They would have just known instinctively, like Ralph Macchio, who knew, I do this and I do that, right? He just knew. It's such a dumb analogy, but he just knew. But what if he had never waxed on and waxed off? What if he had never swept the floor? When the time came, he wouldn't have known what to do. He would have had to ask for help. Same is true with all sorts of things in life. Even auto mechanics who study and get experience in a shop and perhaps even read manuals and study the components within an engine and a transmission and learn how to build from the ground up an engine block. And people who are experienced in those ways, they don't have to guess all the time at what the problem is. Like some of us when our cars malfunction and we think, what's that smell or what's that sound? There are master mechanics. You could call them, put them on speakerphone, and they will tell you in a minute exactly what the problem is. How? Oh, well, sounds like it's running rich. Is there a bunch of black soot on your exhaust pipe? Yep, okay, you're getting too much gas, not enough air. I mean, they just know that stuff. How do they just know that? And the answer is obvious, right? Because they do it every day. They've learned. So that when the time comes, they don't have to guess and hope for help and pray that it's going to work itself out. They just know what to do. And we sometimes think that in Scripture, these people we look up to in the Bible had some secret help that we don't have, that they just knew what to do. We studied Daniel in Sunday school. What a great example. Did Daniel just have some secret relationship with God that I'm never going to have? That he had access to some wisdom I don't have access to? He just knew how to be a good Christian leader, even in a pagan culture? And the answer is no. He just prayed a lot and spent time with God. He had a relationship with God that became so instinctive that in moments of trial, he knew exactly what to do in that moment. And so people came to him for advice. They imitated Daniel, and he was worth imitating because he was faithful in the basics. We don't read that Daniel did things like Elijah, go out and test the prophets of Baal and slaughter them at the brook of Shechem. He didn't do this. He slaughtered 450 prophets, by the way. If you don't know that story, it's an amazing story in the books of Kings. But the prophet Daniel doesn't do anything quite that extraordinary. He is helped, delivered by God time and time again, but he just goes to his room and prays every day, 3 times a day. He just obeys the law, the Torah. That's it. He's just faithful in the basics, and yet he is an astounding figure in Scripture because he did the basics. And so, again, we are invited to just do the basics and see what extraordinary things God can do in our lives, how he can grow us as disciples. Would you stand with me as we wrap this up? The reason we struggle with this is frankly because we have too many diversions and distractions and things that get in the way. We have bad priorities like we've been talking about, and those priorities prevent us from getting back to the basics. We don't have time for the basics. We don't have energy for the basics. We don't make time. We don't save the energy because there are so many other things pulling us in so many directions. And so at some point, when God reaches out, we will have to answer. We will have to take him up on the invitation. It won't last forever that we can just hold up the certificate of marriage and say, hey, when I was a kid, I prayed and got baptized and I'm in. There will come a point where that will no longer suffice, and you'll realize I needed to do more. I needed to have an actual relationship with Christ. I needed to be growing in Christ. It was more than just a prayer or a baptism or membership in a church. Those are all important steps in the process, but it is a process. It's a relationship. In the same way that I couldn't go to a courthouse with Kylie and then 20 years later say, look, we're happily married if we never moved in and never had a family together and never talked. It's idiotic. Even if I visited her house once a week and we had a dinner together once a week, church service, that's really not a healthy marriage, is it? Because that's what some of us are doing in this room. As people used to say, our nod to God, right? How many of you have heard that before? You give a nod to God. It's a weekly moment where you say, oh yeah, this is probably important. Let me check that off the list. But what if God is waiting for something deeper? What if there is a love being offered and ready to be received? I have a poem. I want to close with a poem. I don't do that very often, but I think this is a good one. This is called Staying Power by Jean Murray Walker. It was in appreciation of Maxim Gorky at the International Convention of Atheists in 1929. I said atheist, that's correct. But I think you'll find this poem very moving. Like Gorky, I sometimes follow my doubts outside to the yard and question the sky, longing to have the fight settled, thinking I can't go on like this. And finally I say, all right, it is improbable. All right, there is no God. And then as if I'm focusing a magnifying glass on dry leaves, God blazes up. It's the attention maybe to what isn't there. That makes the emptiness flare like a forest fire until I have to spend the afternoon dragging the hose to put the smoldering thing out. Even on an ordinary day, when a friend calls, tells me they found melanoma, complains that the hospital is cold, I say, God. God, I say, as my heart turns inside out. Pick up any language by the scruff of its neck. Wipe its face, set it down on the lawn, and I bet it will toddle right into the God fire again, which, though they say it doesn't exist, can send you straight to the burn unit. Oh, we have only so many words to think with. Say God's not fire. Say anything. Say God's a phone. Maybe. You know you didn't order a phone, but there it is. It rings. You don't know who it could be. You don't want to talk, so you pull out the plug. It rings. You smash it with a hammer till it bleeds springs and coils and clobbery metal bits. It rings again. You pick it up. And a voice you love whispers, hello. Answer the phone. What do you have to lose? What might you find? And might you be found? Let's pray. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for calling us again and again and again, because your voice is not only a voice we hope to love, but it is a voice filled with love. Help us to answer. Help us to grow in our relationship with you. For our own good sake and for your glory, we ask it. In the name of your Son and through the power of your Spirit, we ask it. Amen.